All right, folks. So today we wrap up the book of Judges, and it goes out with a big bang. And it's very much setting up the plot for the next book, which we will be jumping next week into First Samuel, which begins the talk of kings and dynasties. But as we jump in for the story today, I want to do a little bit of reflection on how the Promised Land experiment has been going so far. So in the book of Joshua, they conquered the area and everything went hunky-dory, everything's great. They did exactly what God said and they conquered all the territories. And then in Judges, we find out they didn't do all of that. But they've been fighting other people. They've been fighting various groups in different wars. We've had leaders rise and fall. And I'm curious what you all are thinking at this point of how things are going as we are now at the end of this book. Yeah, Mary Ellen?
Well, they're about as polar opposite of what the intention for the Promised Land should be.
Mm-hmm.
They have slipped into decadence. They have, they've gotten totally away from the Ten Commandments. They have just destroyed any kind of in my mind, reasonable lifestyle that people could expect in the Promised Land. And it's about as opposite as, I can imagine things are,
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the goal.
Yeah, they're not doing too well with what they set out for. Yeah, Larry?
And it's certainly sort of a bloody background for the basis of our Christian faith, which is about to begin, I'm certainly glad Judges is over.
I will keep checking in with like how far we want to go with some of the history portion, but unfortunately, bloody is not over. It may be for a time, but it gets back to it pretty quick. Sue, what's your thoughts?
I think how little anybody seems to value human life, that you can just wipe people out. And when I'm looking at last week's, they reread 19 and then the beginning of this, I think he cut his concubine out before she was dead. I just don't understand what this has to do. I mean, and God allows this to happen. I mean, he allows all of this to happen and seems to, what's happened? I mean, I think this can't be the God that, well, they've always talked. I mean, God did awful things to, this is just awful stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you think of holy and promised land and chosen people, this is not how the chosen people are supposed to act. Mm-hmm. And there is still a sense of like, okay, God's intervened before. Where is God in here?
Yeah. Well, God eventually sends them out knowing they're going to lose.
Yeah.
He does that twice before he lets them win.
Yeah, that was unusual.
Give me just a second here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Some crisis at the church.
Somebody has written a book currently that says that it's less violent now than it used to be. And first we say, well, that can't be true. But then we start reading something like this, and about the Crusades and all of the other killings, and I begin to think, except for you know, the bombing, the atom bomb in Japan. I mean, you know, it's just, don't we care about people?
Well, it says we don't care much about one another.
Just awful.
Well, yeah, that's what strikes me is that they have turned against each other.
Mhm, mhm.
Right. Well, and then what's going on in Israel now,
Yeah,
in the
It's-
Middle East, and I just read that they're getting ready to, was a different kind of bomb to bomb Iran.
oh, really?
Just popped up on my phone. How can they be doing this? You know, Biden keeps saying, don't do this, and they don't pay any attention. They don't care.
You know, I sometimes wonder how much these stories that are, quote, their history influence
That's what I wonder.
them now.
I keep thinking that when I'm reading it. It's a weird time to be reading this part of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
guess
that-
people just haven't learned how to cooperate and listen to each other and figure out how to get along. It just seems that way. People have never learned that. Just like Bible times, that's horrible. Some of the things that happen.
Was ever thus, and it keeps continuing.
Yes.
And nobody has clean hands.
Nobody has clean hands. Good point, Sue. I don't know about the rest of you. I felt this was kind of confusing, all of this.
Yes.
You know, okay, we've got this situation now, we got this, now this, and now they can't marry anybody, but we'll let them do this. It's like, okay.
I was visiting my sister for a week, and she got the New Yorker, but she also got the New York Review of Books. I don't know how she reads all this stuff. The New York Review of Books New York Review of Books had a long article about from somebody who actually lives in Israel and is a citizen, I believe, about the denial of many of the progressive, peace-loving people. They just don't see it. They don't see what's been going on against the Palestinians for years, and they just turn their heads. And then there was another article about the dynasty of the Levins in Michigan and their role in the Palestinian Israeli saga. And one of the reasons that Andy Levin lost was that he was kind of supporting, they thought he was kind of supporting the Palestinians, and that was a couple of years ago. I didn't realize that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party was very critical of what we were doing in Israel. So now I learned a lot about what's going on. It's a lot of
So sorry about that, folks. I had someone that I needed to answer the door for. I hear that we've gotten onto current events.
Yes.
Sorry.
No worries at all. I was just wondering where the conversation for the Bible study part of this left off.
Becky said that she wondered how much this part of the Bible may be influencing what's going on now. Is that what you said?
That's right. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we mostly Chris, we were good.
Okay,
We
that's
talked
fine.
about how they never learned and they never got along. And I think it's an interesting part of this is that it becomes a family feud. It's within the family. It's not the Ammonites or the Moabites.
Oh.
It's Benjaminites, and that's just, and I think it's a little bit confusing about the back and forth of all of this, but
They have mixed feelings about what they're doing, but they keep on doing it anyway.
Yeah.
There's also I think, a very human, unfortunate trait that at one point they are upset that God broke its covenant and they no longer have 12 tribes, that God allowed one tribe to disappear. And so they're blaming God for that. I thought that was pretty interesting, just like they felt very comfortable changing their ethics or morality, and it was okay to kidnap the young women from the dance celebration, but that was okay to kidnap them, but you couldn't allow your daughters to go with them. Anyway, I thought that was very human, kind of human nature, an ugly trait, I guess.
That was
Right.
before kidnapping was a capital offense.
Just
Right. So we can kind of, I see this almost as a slow deflation of their ideals and the hopes and dreams that they set out with. Because at first, they set up the 12 tribes, they kind of like move in. Unfortunately, moving in meant moving other people out, but they kind of set up shop. And you're right. At first, they're fighting people on the outside. They're like, okay, we're going to battle this group. We're going to battle this group. But then it seems like there's the turn where all of a sudden they're setting up another a shrine, an unauthorized shrine that may or may not be for the Israelite God, but it's using a statue, which they're not supposed to do. And then, well, we have this other thing over here where we're just going to we have a little bit of murder, a little bit of rape, and then we have civil war, and then not only do we have the civil war, well, this one group didn't participate in civil war. We're going to genocide that group of people. We're going to kidnap the daughters, and then, well, now we still want the magic number 12, so now we're also going to kidnap. And you can just see like all morality is just going out.
Well, they really want to make sure that the Benjaminites, or whatever they are, reproduce.
Right. And so you can see
Pretty weird, yeah.
when they don't really have an outside force to kind of keep themselves propped up, they turn and fight against each other, which I also think is a very human thing. Unity is often felt when there is a common enemy, and when there's not a common enemy, your brother, you're the other political party, name it, your neighbor next door, that person then becomes the one you will compete against and fight against and become the enemy. So let's actually talk a little bit about what is going on in chapter 20 and 21, so we get our idea around how this is, how the rest of the deflation and how really things descend into chaos. So we ended last time talking about the Levite and the situation with his concubine and the men of the particular town of Benjamin. And that chapter ends with the Levite chopping up his concubine, mailing it out to the 12 tribes, which is a traditional call to arms. And so the Israelites assemble. It says they assemble as one body before the Lord at Mizpah, which is a word that means like lookout or watchtower. So this is a gathering place. And theoretically, God is able to watch out over the tribes as they are gathering in this place. And that is when they're like, okay, you sent the call. What's going on, Mr. Levite here? And the Levite gives his version of the story in verses 4 through 7. And I'm curious what you notice in his recounting of what happened versus what we see in the story before. Yeah, Larry?
Well, he makes it very clear that the other side killed the concubine. He didn't. She was dead when he picked her up to bring her home.
So he wants to clarify he did not kill her.
Correct.
Is there something he leaves ambiguous in this story?
I don't know.
The question, so one of the questions is the Levite a reliable narrator of this event?
No,
I don't
Because
think so.
No, you don't think so, Gretchen? Why not?
Well, for one thing, he doesn't really say that they really came after him, not to kill him first. They really came after him to demean him, and he leaves that out, he goes directly to the killing. And he was involved in, he's not a, what do you call it, a narrator that we can trust.
Mhm.
Um,
So he doesn't want to admit that he was nearly violated or humiliated. He would rather be seen as someone who was nearly killed.
Oh, yeah.
There's another piece to this where he kind of doesn't tell the story for the fact he is telling his version of the story that's not necessarily honest.
Hmm.
And that he jumps straight to they intended to kill me and instead they raped her to death. He does not mention that he threw her
He
out of
threw
the
her
house.
out.
Yeah.
So he is just like, oh yes, this just happened, where he actually had some responsibility and culpability. And so
Mm.
that's one of them where people are like, this guy's not being fully honest about what's happening here.
Well, his motive was to save his own skin, I would think. I mean,
Yeah.
he offered her as a substitute for him. Kill her instead of me.
Hmm.
And I think it's interesting that the story gets repeated.
Mhm.
It emphasizes what happened. I mean,
Mhm.
Hmm.
you tell it often enough, everybody believes it.
It'll be true.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And there's no comment on the fact that there's no frame that says he distorted the story. The person who writes doesn't say anything about that.
Hmm.
I don't know whether they ever do that in the Bible, but
People who are like the rabbis and commentators always notice when there's discrepancies. So,
so we should be reading them. Yeah.
mhm. So, his final comment, or one of the other things that's important to kind of touch on a conversation we were talking about last time of whether or not this is about violence and power or if it's about sexuality. You will see in his recounting of this story, he's not concerned about the sexuality as much as he is concerned about the violence.
Mm.
And so it's always good to pay attention to what is kind of focused on. In Sodom and Gomorrah, we get other texts that are talking about issues of hospitality and a breach of hospitality. Here, it seems to he is talking about like, has this ever been done in Israel? And he seems to be upset about the violence of it. And the vile act is more about the aggressiveness, rather like he doesn't even bring up that like they wanted to assault me. That's not in his mind. So I think that gives us a lens to what the ancient world would be concerned about in this text. And it is, once again, this is a breach of hospitality. This is not how you treat your kinsfolk. What's going on here?
I think
Go ahead.
well, the woman's role is definitely underplayed. That
Mhm.
she's suffers all night long.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, Clay, I saw a hand. Check your mute
You're
first.
muted.
Just the wording that he uses and says that they rose against me. rather than saying they wanted to know me.
Mhm.
I mean, he's already, so that terminology plays it down right away
Mhm.
to power.
Mhm.
The violence isn't commensurate, so they decide to wipe out the Benjaminites, practically, you know, not all of the men, but
Mhm.
women and children. How is that? How is
So
that? Fine.
let's kind of walk down the line to see if we can actually figure out why they choose to do what they do. So the Levite effectively calls people to arms, riles them up, and then all the people are like, okay, yeah, we need to take care of this issue. They are they do in like 8 verses 8, 9, and 10. They do think that it's not appropriate for everyone in the tribe to go. So they're taking 10% of each of the tribes, drawing lots to create a group that we learn later is 400,000 men, which is still a lot of people. So they're creating a big army, not everyone, but a big army. Why would you all think their response is, okay, this city of people did something that they consider vile, we're going to get a big army to go and wipe this town out? Why would that be the response? Can you think of a reason why you would just want to eliminate the town?
Seems they just did that sort of thing in that way. I mean, if you were affronted, you destroyed something.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a sense of getting rid of the evil in our midst?
That would be my guess, is that the thought is if this town is so corrupt that they would violate the rules of hospitality for their own kinfolk, we just need to eliminate them. And so that culture doesn't continue, so those habits don't continue, so that lineage, that line does not continue, because it's a bad branch of the tree. So let's just prune the branch. The thing is, this is why Leviticus actually becomes important with some of the laws that we find in it. Why we talked about things like the goring ox. The goring ox and a lot of other examples actually put limitations of violence. While it seems very brutal by our standards, it's preventing things like this of, this whole town attacked a Levite, we should just prune the entire town from our midst, and then we don't have to deal with these violent people. Instead, there's actual rules to make sure everyone's treated equally and you're not just acting out of rage. But they're not paying attention to Leviticus. Yeah, Clay?
Well, as you keep reading, though, it says that they want the town to give up the men who did this.
Mm-hmm.
So would they have stopped there? If those men had been brought out to them and they had killed those men, would they have stopped at that and not continued on? Because the Benjaminites refused to bring those men out, so of course everything else happens, but would they have stopped with just killing those men?
So theoretically, yes. Theoretically, if they would have given up the perpetrators, they would have just taken out the people who had violated the sense of hospitality in those rules. In the refrain that Leviticus does use, purge the evil from among you. But Benjamin, the whole town, is refusing to purge the evil among them. So at the point where there's people who are violent towards their own people, and you have another group of people protecting them, is that now justification for attacking the entire tribe if the entire tribe is protecting violent people?
There is no question that some men, that there is a group of men who are guilty of doing this, without question. They can be identified. And the question is, should they also be protected simply because they are brothers, regardless of the seriousness of their offense? And it appears that the whole town chooses to defend these men instead of letting justice be served. And as a result, then the whole town's going to get destroyed.
Mhm. So
Gary,
oh yeah, Gary, go for it. Thank you.
I don't know why I have this twist to it, but I have a feeling if these men who just nonchalantly show up and are going to commit these crimes, they control this city already. And so when they're asked to, send out the guilty ones, they're not going to walk out and surrender themselves because they're running the place already.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good point.
So I think the difference here, or part of it though, is it's not just that this city has, Gary, I think your read on the situation is correct. Like, if the men are regularly doing this, these are probably the powerful men in the city. But it is not just the city that gets embroiled in this issue, it's the entire tribe of Benjamin. And there's other, I don't know if this is the only city in Benjamin, but there's definitely more people in the tribe of Benjamin than just this city. And the entire tribe sides with the city. And so this is the point where all of a sudden you're not just dealing with a city and a group of powerful men, you're dealing with one of the 12 tribes in it of itself. And so the question is, do you punish the entire tribe because the entire tribe sided with the powerful men in one city in particular? And this is still a question that we deal with today. And this is where I'm going to pull it a little bit to our modern day in thinking about things. If you go according to the Geneva Conventions, which I believe most people in the world say are a good idea, the Geneva Conventions say that corporal punishment is against the Geneva Conventions. You cannot punish an entire population because of the actions of a few. So attacking the entire tribe of Benjamin, it does not align with the Geneva Conventions. However, we have often, especially with the US's involvement in various conflicts, especially in the Middle East, we seem to be okay targeting civilians if there is a person of power and leadership surrounded by civilians, and we call those casualties. But once again,
Collateral damage.
or collateral damage, yes.
Damage.
There's a certain amount of collateral damage that people in high positions make calls, and there's a certain percentage where people say that's an adequate level of collateral damage for us to be willing to engage. And this is the issue with some of the conflicts that that are going on in the world today. How much collateral damage is acceptable? And when is it that the population is supporting people that are dangerous? And when is it that they're just too close because there's not enough space?
Of course, there is also a difference in unavoidable damage to a few people around them to decimating the entire population simply because of the infractions.
Mhm. So these are questions, while this is an ancient context and a little bit more hand-to-hand bloody combat, the questions behind it are still the same. Of who decides what's just? And who makes the call of when justice has been achieved? And
Yeah.
what do you do when powerful people who are violent and abusive are being protected? How do you respond?
And why didn't God intervene right then instead of
There you
letting
go.
things play out?
Right.
Isn't it Woody Allen says God is an underachiever?
Yeah.
So let's talk about a few of the details because God is mentioned in the story, and I think it's interesting to see some of the details and how this is likely playing out. So when it comes to numbers, we see that the Benjaminites are gathering their army. They have a much lower number. So they have 26,000 armed men as opposed to 400,000 men. So there is an order of magnitude that the rest of the tribes are able to bring to the table. However, they have the Benjaminites have basically special forces, 700 men that are left-handed or ambidextrous. And if you're this is actually a big deal in the ancient world because if you're used to fighting one way and you have a guy who can bring a sword in the other hand, and it's actually very dangerous. So they're outnumbered, but the Benjaminites might be outskill the Israelites. And so in 18, the Israelites go to Bethel. Bethel is where the Ark of the Covenant is being held. So that's why they're doing their inquiries there. And so for the first battle, the Israelites ask God, which of us shall go up first? Pausing there. First question, what do you think of that question? Is that the right question to ask? Or
They
is
might
there a
ask, why
what was that?
should we go?
Like, what's the goal?
Right.
Is there a question you all would have asked first other than which one of us goes first? Yeah, Larry? I mean, not Larry, Gary.
I think first I'd ask whether God was with us, no matter who went first, or should get permission to do this, to make the attack.
God, should we attack them? Are you going to be on our side or are you with them?
They're assuming that they're going to do it, and that's who goes first.
Yeah, yeah. They've already made up their mind.
Which shows you a little bit about their mindset. They are already set on what they are going to do. They just want advice on how to do it. But that also means they haven't consulted God with the justice of the situation.
Correct.
So the Lord answers Judah should go up first. We know by how they ask questions later, this is likely either by an oracle, like the priest are supposed to have those two stones in their the breastplate that they have, there's two stones. And so they're likely casting lots with each of them to see, like, should this one go first? Yes or no? And so they're asking yes or no questions. This is not like Moses, where Moses goes into the tent of meeting and it's just like, hey, God, can you tell me what to do? This is probably more like divining, either pulling straws or using the stones and casting for an answer. So that's why they're asking questions the way they are. I would still argue they're not asking the right questions.
Yeah.
So they are told Judah's going to go up first, and they attempt to do battle, and they are not successful. The Benjaminites and their special forces cut a lot of them down. So the second question they ask is, shall we draw near to the battle against our kinfolk of the Benjaminites? So first one is, who should go first? Second question is, shall we go up? Should we actually do this? And the Lord says, go up against them. So they get the thumbs up, like, yes, you have permission now to fight the Benjaminites. But once again, the Benjaminites cut them down. The Benjaminites and their special forces are still more powerful. So they regroup for the third time. They fast. They are weeping. They're offering sacrifices because they're figuring something's not going right. We've kind of gotten word from God saying, hey, this group should go up first. Yes, you have permission to go, but both times they weren't successful. And so once again, we see a little bit more detail. So we do have priests that are doing it. This is in verse 27. We get a little bit more about they probably are casting lots. And then they finally ask, shall we go out once more to do battle against our kinfolk, or shall we desist? So that is probably the question they should have asked first. But we see God say, yes, go up against your kinfolk. Keep going. So knowing that the number of 400,000 men has been cut down considerably. They have a lot less troops. And this will be the battle where they're actually successful. And I'm curious if this sounds at all familiar with some of the stories we've heard before in Judges and in the book of Joshua, where their numbers have been reduced, but it seems like God's presence is what wins. Is that a familiar trope you guys are used to at this point?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Larry?
Well, at least in the text, God actually tells them, hey, look, go out this time, because this time I'm going to see that you win.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
also, God says he's with them and they're gonna win. But it seems like there's a pattern too, that they have better tactics. They don't just crash into the city or come in. It seems that is a thread throughout some of these battles, is that when they kind of take a few minutes to think about how they're going to do this, it works out better for them.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of wisdom in that in general, but yeah, they do much better when they're not just relying on numbers. Numbers alone doesn't win the war. They do much better when they have strategy. And strategy is often attributed to God. So
Mm-hmm.
Aren't the numbers highly inflated?
yes. Oh yeah, the numbers are not accurate at all. Yeah, I would take them more as like
A
the
whole lot?
differential is more important than the actual number itself.
Mm-hmm.
So God's going to be with them. The strategy this time is they're going to arrange an ambush. They're going to make it look like they're losing so they can kind of divide up the army and actually use their numbers effectively. What ends up happening is they divide the army. So like one group gets routed towards the woods, another one gets routed towards the city, and they're able to actually conquer the Benjaminites. And they destroy everyone but I believe about 600 men. And they kill everyone else and they burn the city. It is said that 18,000 Benjaminites fell, and all of them courageous fighters. Like, it's one of those, if you all notice this, they're very complimentary of the Benjaminites, even as they are like decimating them.
Well, they're
Because-
Israelites after all.
Mhm.
Well, and because look how long it took us to to win, but it was because they were really skilled. They had their left-handed rock
Mhm.
throwers. And I think that I love this, the city, the people, the animals, all that remained there. I think, oh,
Mhm.
the animals.
Yeah, Clay?
My Bible uses the word valor. They're men of valor, and that to me
Oh,
is absolutely wrong to say. That to me is like honorable.
Yeah,
So anyway, just mentioning
ah,
brave.
the word my Bible uses is valor instead of courage.
interesting.
See, one of the weird catch-22s is like this is a society of honor and valor where your honor is your social capital, and the Benjaminites defending their own is actually considered a good and honorable thing. It's just unfortunate that they're defending their own who are violent men who are not who have done horrible things. And so it seems like the text is kind of balancing, like they were men of courage and valor because they defended their tribe, but also they were doing horrible things, so they needed to be held to justice. And they're trying to balance those, which is interesting. But this sets up the last problem, or the problem in 21. Where all of a sudden, okay, so the tribe of Benjamin is nearly wiped out. There's only 600 men left, and they don't have any women, so they don't have wives. And so if they don't have wives, they're going to die out, and then they're going to lose one of the tribes of Israel. But we don't hear about this in the beginning, but evidently all the tribes that went up to attack Benjamin, they all made vows, and vows are very important. If you remember, they are living, breathing contracts. But they have all vowed to not give any of their daughters in marriage to the Benjaminites. Which, you know what? If the Benjaminites treated the concubine the way they did, I could understand a bunch of dads saying, yeah, we're not giving one of our daughters to that lot. That to me sounds understandable. But there's also the thing where they don't want to lose one of their 12 tribes. So, solution number 1. Find out if any like clan within the 12 tribes didn't send people for battle. Did anyone decide not to fight in this war? Because then they haven't vowed to not give their daughters in marriage, but also that was dishonorable. You should have sent your young men for military service. So they find a tribe, Gilead, which is actually on the eastern side of the Jordan. So this is on the other side of the Jordan. And they found a group that didn't send men, which means their daughters have not been vowed to not be married, but they also decide to just kill the entire clan. And then take 400 of their daughters who were virgins and give them to the Benjaminites. So what do you think about this initial plan? We're just going to genocide a tribe to get their daughters.
Now, these were not Hebrew, were they?
These were not what?
They were not part of the Hebrew.
Yes, they were.
They were. Okay.
They were.
What clan was this? They
So
had
this
one.
is in 21.
I didn't realize that. Okay, so they found a clan that hadn't promised not to.
Yes, they didn't
their-
promise not to give their daughters, but it's because they didn't participate in the Civil War.
Okay. Okay. Good. Well. So now they're worried about keeping their 12 tribes together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
wonder-
Clay?
Or left-handed people.
But if you do away with one of the tribes and take all the women for another tribe, you're back to 11.
Right, you still got 11, right?
So
you're back
this
to-
is This is a clan underneath a tribe. So this is
Oh.
one of
Subclan.
yeah, it's a sub clan.
Okay, that explains it, because I wondered about that when I read it. I thought, aren't they just back to 11? So anyway, that explains it.
Mm-hmm.
So they went after Jabesh Gilead and wiped them out, except for 400 women who had never lain with a man.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, those beautiful women.
Yeah.
You
So do
gotta
you
be
think that
perfect.
it not sending your young men for military service, is that worthy of being annihilated?
Wiped out.
Because that puts them on the same, like Benjamin, who
Benjamin.
protected violent men, is being saved, but not sending your men for military service is worthy of, like, nope, we're just gonna cut you off. Those are given semi-equal treatments.
Well,
Yeah, Clay? Check your mute.
Well, the last line of this chapter says, once
Yeah.
again, there was no king, and every man did what was right. If there had been a king, they would have made the decision.
mhm.
Do
Mhm.
this.
Ah, so you think all of this disorder would have been solved if they just had central leadership?
Well, at least this last one possibly would have been. Who knows? Because they've repeated this line again every time something like this happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is the third time this line has popped up. The first time there was a sense of like, well, everyone's doing the best they can. They're doing what's right in their eyes. And I return to the question, how's that working out for them? So do we see this as like everyone's doing the best they can, everyone's doing a good job, you get an A for effort, or is this a critique of what's going on?
Yeah, I see this one as a critique of how this all ended.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the next line is that wasn't enough women for them, though.
Right. Yeah. So
600 men, 400 women, not enough.
so the final solution, there's an annual festival in Shiloh, which was already a bigger town, also a major religious site. This comes up in the time of the kings. We'll get to it. Shiloh becomes very important. But there's a dancing festival. So what the solution is, the remaining 200 men just kidnap a bride. That's okay. Just as she's dancing, haul her away. And if her dad gets mad, just say, well, you didn't break your vow. But notably, if you kidnap a wife, you don't have to pay a bride price. And the father still has dishonor to his name. So this is the final solution. Just kidnap people. Is this a good solution?
Well, but it's kidnapping women. So it's not their mighty warriors. And the warriors, the men, have the right to do this because they don't want to wipe out the tribe. And so anything for the tribe.
Mm-hmm. Anything is worth it as long as you continue the tribe. I honestly think this sounds absolutely horrible, just being kidnapped while you're trying to have a good time and dance with your friends. So, yeah, things are pretty much in disarray at this point. If the solution to not enough wives is not maybe renegotiate the vows that you make, but instead kidnapping has the stamp of approval. And like Clay said, the book ends with, in those days there was no king in Israel, and all the people just did what they saw was right in their own eyes. So this is the way the book of Judges ends, and I'm curious what you're thinking right now. What would be your prescription if you are God above and are looking at this situation of what the people you set up, you saved these people from Pharaoh, you wandered with them in the desert for 40 years, you finally gave them, you fulfilled your promise, you gave them a set of rules to live by, and this is what they're doing? What would be your prescription for the people?
I don't think it would be to get a king.
No?
Unless the king is a very wise person and has them all back for in-service training on the Ten Commandments or something. It's just, I don't know.
So maybe not a king. There's some problems with some divine leadership. Okay.
There is.
Yeah,
If-
Gary?
Happened.
If you had an individual or a body that was isolated or divorced from the tribes enough that they could look at the bigger picture, because it seems like they're just going on from day to day, week to week, get things done, and whatever it takes. So I don't know if the king is the thing, but if somebody could take a look at the bigger picture for 12 tribes and all their little unique aspects, might be a benefit to them.
So
And that
even
could be
if you don't, oh, go for it.
I was gonna say, that could be a prophet, like Samuel. But that
Right.
gets ahead of the story.
So it seems like even if you don't have centralized leadership, you need at least a centralized judicial body or a judicial person. I would say judge, but judge is a little bit confusing in this context. But you need an arbitrator. You need someone who can I'm missing a word, but someone to come in and resolve conflicts. A mediator. There we go. They at least need a mediator or some kind of person to say, okay, you are in the wrong here. You did a bad thing. This is how you're going to repay them. Because it seems like between tribes, they are having a hard time figuring out how to settle their disagreements and how to find justice. Yeah, Mary Ellen?
But where would this person come from?
That's a good
Yeah.
question. Where would that kind of a person come from?
And would have to build some kind of a reputation already as being successful at this and be someone who was trusted by all the parties involved. So where would this person come from?
So I think the first question would be, what kind of values would you want in a person who acted as a mediator? Because one of the first things that relates to the question, where would they come from, is if you choose a mediator from one of the 12 tribes, everyone's going to accuse another one of being biased because that's the tribe you came from. So what are the values, at least, that a person should have to be able to be the mediator?
Fairness in one situation and being open to listen to both sides.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, this person would have had to been doing this for quite a period of time in order to have the reputation to be chosen.
Mm-hmm.
Come out of nowhere.
So there needs to be some kind of training
Or experience.
or experience, yeah. Yeah,
Using,
Gretchen?
in family systems, we would say it should be a non-anxious presence.
So
Somebody
someone
who's-
non-anxious, someone who has an even keel, someone who's not gonna get
Right.
bent out of shape when things get messy.
But
It has to be someone who the other people trust. And someone who's trusted by more than his own tribe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Gary, did you have a thought?
Yeah, but I think it might be out of sequence. I should have asked it 5 minutes
It's
ago.
okay. Go for it anyways.
When they established vows, how was that done? And did they have the right to reestablish, or were they comfortable in reassessing those vows?
So, what a traditional vow would often look like is you would go to the city gate somewhere public where like business and meetings would happen. You would say it vocally, and often, I'm not taking my shoe off for this, but they would have their shoe and they would hand their shoe to another party because it's something weird. Like you just don't hand your shoes on a dusty, dirty street all the time because shoes are gross. And so by like handing your sandal to someone, it was a visual representation that a vocal vow had been made. And that was a legally binding contract. So yes, it was legally binding. I don't fully know what a change, because for us, changing a contract means like both parties have to renegotiate. You can redraw it up and make signatures. I do believe there would be a way to change it. I don't know what that would look like, but it's one of those vows were a little bit more permanent because you can't take back the words you put into the world. But there would maybe ways that you could renegotiate things, or there's often loopholes that you can find.
Was this process led by someone, or can you just go to the town square or wherever and do it on your own?
Yes, you didn't need someone to officiate it. Your words are powerful, so use them carefully.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
but I was,
Yeah, Gretchen.
well, I was thinking about the great covenants that people had made, what, on Mount Gerizim and the other mountain, you know, where they stood on one side and then they said, oh, yes, we'll do it. And they said, yeah, they all agreed. This is kind of a formal decision that we will be good people from now on.
Mhm.
But you're talking more about the kind of more individual or
Mhm.
regional or
Yeah. So if you think back to like Jephthah, who made a vow that he was going to sacrifice
Oh.
whatever came through his door first, that he just spoke into the air and people heard him. Enough that even his daughter eventually knew. The problem is, or so here's the catch-22, like he makes good on his vow because of his daughter. If he did not make good on his vow, basically his word is useless anymore and you lose all credibility. The thing is, the Israelites are already breaking their vows to God. It's not like no one ever broke vows. They do it all the time. It's just your words become meaningless the more you do that. So your credibility as a person, so like it would be like the first father to give his daughter to a Benjaminite after they said, oh, we're not going to do this. His credibility for doing any other kind of business would plummet. Think of it more like a credit rating score. Like how meaningful are your words? And what is your credit rating for how good you are at following through on what you say? Yeah, Mary Ellen?
I was gonna say that's the same today. It's the
Yeah.
same thing. I mean, if somebody constantly tells lies, you don't trust what they say. If somebody constantly backs out of an agreement or denies doing this and such, you don't trust them anymore. So, you know, being true to your words, you know, it's the same today. Because that's the only way they had of making vows and didn't, you know, have the lawyers and the contracts and all the rest of that to draw up. Their word may have had a great deal more significance, but the reputation part of it's the same.
Yep. Yeah, Clay?
I just was looking it up a little bit and it said, and I remember this now, that a father or husband could change the vow or the wording or whatever in the same day if it affected his daughter or something like that. That if it was done in the same day, he could do it. And then they said, if not, you would appeal to the God. You know, you would appeal to God and maybe make a sacrifice or something like that. To you know, do another vow. I don't know if that helps at all, but
Yeah, interesting. Alrighty. Well, folks,
That-
we're at time. Oh, yeah, Gary, sorry.
I just, what Clay's saying, yeah, we kind of accept that today. If somebody corrects themselves and apologizes within a short period of time, we tend to just erase it immediately. It's gone then. It's acceptable to have made a mistake if you admit it.
Yeah.
and often your reputation is even enhanced if you admit that you're wrong. Or you made a mistake and do it fairly quickly. So
Kind of a positive characteristic.
yeah, it's a good characteristic.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not many people doing that, right?
They stand out, right?
Alrighty. Well, folks, this does bring us to the end of Judges. I will, if you want to keep thinking about something before next week, think about what it would take to be a good mediator, because that is actually what our next book is going to open up with, is the type of person who is going to fill that role in all of Israel. So
Are we skipping Ruth?
yes, we are skipping Ruth because Ruth is, it is put in here time-wise, but the story of Ruth was not written at this point in time. So, it is also a different genre, has a different purpose. So we skip Ruth and hit 1 Samuel. I will do a bit of history, as I do at the beginning of most books. It won't be the full drawn out one because we're still in the same time period for like when they were written, when they were assembled, all of that jazz. But we are entering into the monarchical stories. So we are moving towards a monarchy. The conversation will continue of whether or not monarchies are actually good or not. So we end Judges with a pretty pro-monarchy point of view, but that doesn't mean that is everyone's point of view. So, any final thoughts before we pray ourselves out today? Any final thoughts on Judges? Yeah.
First 2 chapters of Samuel.
Yes, chapter 1 and
First
2.
2. Okay, thank you.
Alrighty. Well, let us pray. Loving God, as it turns out, human nature doesn't change all that much. We still struggle to find out what is the right thing to do. We struggle to check in with you before we do the thing to make sure that we are on the right path. We struggle to know when enough is enough, and we struggle to find leadership that will guide us out of conflicts. Help us in our day-to-days, in our interpersonal relationships, in our community relationships, and as a nation and as a world. Because whilst our world is less violent than it used to be, violence continues, and we still struggle to understand what to do with it, what to do with leaders that are leading us into conflicts. How do we respond to conflicts that don't punish common people who are just caught in the crosshairs? So be with us. We give special prayers today as violence is spreading in our world. People are recovering from natural disasters and illness is spreading in the community again. So be with us all, and especially be with this group until we're able to gather again together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris, and everybody else.